Jesus told over 30 parables. Most people maybe remember 5, but these weren't just nice stories. They were spiritual grenades. He told them to confuse the proud and comfort the humble. So let's go through every parable he told. Quick, clear, with real-life meaning. And we'll start where Jesus started, with what the kingdom of heaven is actually like. You'd think he'd say the kingdom is like a throne, or a kingdom with an army, but no. Here's what he said instead. The kingdom is like a mustard seed. That's in Matthew chapter 13. It's tiny, easy to ignore, but when planted it grows into the largest plant in the garden, big enough for birds to nest in. What's the point? God's work doesn't always look impressive at first. Small prayer. A quiet act of obedience. A decision nobody sees. That's mustard seed work. And if you're doing it, don't stop. The tree is coming, even if all you see now is dirt. Then Jesus said, the kingdom is like yeast. Matthew chapter 13, verse 33. A woman mixes it into a massive amount of flour, and slowly, quietly, the whole thing rises. This one's about quiet influence. Yeast works in the dark. And so does the Spirit of God. If you've been wondering whether your prayers, your parenting, your tiny acts of faithfulness are doing anything, they are. You don't have to be loud to change things. You just have to stay mixed in. Next, Jesus said the kingdom is like treasure hidden in a field, and also like a priceless pearl. Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 to 46. In both stories, someone finds something so valuable, they sell everything just to have it. And here's what's wild. They don't feel like they're losing anything. They feel like they're winning. That's how the kingdom works. It might cost you everything, but once you see it, it doesn't feel like a sacrifice. It feels like a steal. If following Jesus still feels like loss, maybe you haven't seen the treasure clearly yet. He also said the kingdom is like a net. That's in Matthew chapter 13, verse 47. A giant fishing net gets thrown into the sea. It catches all kinds of fish. But when it's pulled up on shore, the sorting begins. The good are kept. The bad are thrown away. That's the future. The gospel invitation goes wide, but God is the one who sorts. Being caught in the net isn't the same as being kept in the kingdom. So don't just ask, am I near church? Ask, has Jesus changed me? Then there's this one. A farmer plants seed and goes to bed. That's Mark chapter 4, verses 26 to 29. While he sleeps, the seed sprouts and grows and eventually produces a harvest. And Jesus says, that's the kingdom too. You do your part. You plant, you water, you show up. But the real growth, that's God's job. If you've been faithfully showing up in your calling, in your home, in prayer, and you're not seeing results yet, keep going. You're not the grower, you're the sower. Another picture he gives is about weeds and wheat. Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 24. A farmer plants good seed, but his enemy sneaks in and plants weeds. When the servants ask, should we pull the weeds? The farmer says no, let them grow together. We'll sort it out at harvest. This one's about patience and perspective. You're going to see people who fake it. People who use God's name, but don't live like him. And Jesus says, don't get distracted. Don't start judging. Don't lose heart. At harvest time, God will handle the difference between wheat and weeds. Your job, keep growing. And finally, he said this. Every teacher of the kingdom is like a homeowner, one who brings out treasures both old and new. It's in Matthew chapter 13, verse 52. In other words, if you've seen the kingdom, you've got treasure inside you. Ancient truth, fresh insight. Things the world needs, and it's your job to bring it out. It's not just in sermons or content, but in your life. So teach, write, share, live like someone who's been in the treasure room, because you have. That's how Jesus described the kingdom, not with castles, but with seeds. Bread, nets, and treasure. It starts small, spreads quietly, costs everything, and ends with a harvest. And now that you've seen what the kingdom is like, let's look at the heart of the king behind it. So we've seen what the kingdom is like. Let's talk about the king. Because some of Jesus' most powerful parables are the ones where he's showing us exactly what God is like. And spoiler, he's way more merciful than most people think. Let's dive in. First up, the lost sheep. Luke chapter 15. Jesus says a shepherd has 100 sheep. One wanders off. Instead of writing it off, he leaves the 99 and goes after the one. And when he finds it, he celebrates. Let that sink in. God doesn't wait for you to find your way back. He comes after you. He doesn't come angry. He comes rejoicing. If you've drifted, you're still seen. You're still wanted, and he's already on the way. Next, the lost coin, still in Luke 15. A woman has 10 silver coins. She loses one. So what does she do? Tears the house apart looking for it. Lights a lamp, sweeps the floor, doesn't quit. When she finds it, she throws a party. This is how Jesus describes God searching for you. Not frustrated. Not impatient. Intentional. You are not just another face in the crowd. You're the missing coin. Heaven throws a party when you're found. Then he tells maybe his most famous story, the Prodigal Son. Luke chapter 15. Again, young man asks for his inheritance early. Leaves. Wastes everything. Ends up broke, alone, and feeding pigs. But when he decides to come home, before he even gets to the door, his father runs to him. No lecture, no shame, just open arms, a robe, a ring, feast. And Jesus says, that's what the Father is like. So if you're worried you've messed up too much, hear this. God isn't waiting to punish you. He's waiting to embrace you. Come home. But he doesn't stop there. Tells another story. This one with a warning. The unforgiving servant. Matthew chapter 18. A man owes the king millions. The king forgives the entire debt. But then that same man goes out, grabs someone who owes him a few $100, and demands payment. No mercy. When the king hears about it, he's furious, because someone who's been forgiven much should forgive much. Jesus is saying, if you've received grace, you don't get to hoard it. Mercy should flow through you, not stop with you. So ask yourself, are you holding someone hostage over what God has already forgiven you for? Then he paints another picture. This one's about two people who owed money. Luke chapter 7. One owes a little, one owes a lot. Both debts are canceled. And Jesus asks, who do you think loves more? Answer, the one who was forgiven more. This parable is simple, but piercing. If you think your sin is small, your love will be too. But when you realize the size of your rescue, gratitude starts pouring out of you, and it changes the way you worship. Next, he tells a story that offends the religious mindset. The workers in the vineyard, Matthew chapter 20. A landowner hires workers throughout the day, some early in the morning, some at the last hour. But at the end of the day, they all get paid the same. The workers who started early complain. This isn't fair, but the master says, are you mad because I'm generous? This is what grace looks like. It doesn't pay by the hour. That's good news for the latecomers. It's because whether you've served Jesus for 50 years or 50 minutes, you get the same reward. Him. And finally, one of the most radical stories Jesus told, the Good Samaritan. Luke chapter 10. A Jewish man is beaten and left for dead. A priest walks by, then a Levite. Both religious, both avoid him. But a Samaritan, someone his people would normally hate, stops. He bandages the wounds, lifts him onto a donkey, pays for his care, goes out of his way. Then Jesus turns the story around. He asks, who was the real neighbor here? And then he says, go and do the same. Jesus isn't just telling you what God is like. He's telling you what you should be like, because real love costs something. It interrupts your schedule. It crosses cultural lines. And it looks like mercy in motion. So what do these parables show us? God doesn't give up on the one. He searches. He forgives, runs. He overpays. He notices people the world ignores, and he expects us to love the same way. That's the heartbeat of heaven. And if it's not pulsing in us, we may know the rules, but not the king. Let's keep moving this next set of parables. They're not comforting, they're clarifying. They're about urgency, readiness, and whether you're actually living like Jesus could come back today. Here we go. First, the 10 virgins. Matthew chapter 25. 10 bridesmaids are waiting for the groom. 5 are wise. They bring extra oil for their lamps. 5 are foolish. They run out. At midnight, the groom shows up. The wise go in. The door is shut. And the foolish miss everything. Jesus ends the story with this: keep watch. You don't know the day or the hour. You know what this means? You can't borrow someone else's oil. You can't live off your pastor's passion, your parents' faith, your friend's fire. You've got to be ready personally, because when the door shuts, that's it. Then, the parable of the talents. Matthew chapter 25 again. A master gives one servant 5 bags of silver, another 2, another 1. The first to invest and multiply what they were given, the last one, he buries it, out of fear. When the master returns, he praises the first 2, well done, good and faithful servant. But the last one calls him wicked and lazy. Here's the point: God's not asking you to be the next Billy Graham. He's asking what you've done with your gift, your time, your influence, your story. Burying it because you're afraid isn't humility. It's disobedience. Jesus also told a story about 2 builders. Matthew chapter 7. One builds on rock, the other on sand. When the storm hits, only one house stands. You've probably heard this one, but don't miss the detail. Both builders heard Jesus' words. The difference? Only one actually did them. The takeaway: you can go to church, take notes, listen to sermons, but if you're not living it, you're building on sand. Then there's the rich fool. Luke chapter 12. A man's land produces a crazy harvest. It says, I'll tear down my barns and build bigger ones. He's planning to eat, drink, and be merry for years. But God shows up that night and says, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded of you. Jesus isn't condemning wealth. He's exposing short-sightedness. He made plans for retirement. But what about eternity, the moral? Don't be rich in the world and bankrupt before God. Then there's a story about a doorkeeper. Mark chapter 13. A master goes away, leaves his servants in charge, and tells the one at the door, keep watch. Jesus says we don't know when he's coming, morning, night, at midnight, or dawn. So stay ready. This isn't about paranoia. It's about posture. Live like your king could show up tonight. Would he find you scrolling, wasting time, or walking in your calling? He also talks about servants waiting for their master to return. Luke chapter 12. Jesus says, the ones who stay ready, lamps burning, hearts alert will be rewarded. Get this. He says the master will serve them at the table. The King of Heaven, serving his faithful servants. That's the kind of Savior we follow. So if you feel like nobody sees the faithfulness, the late-night prayers, the quiet obedience, Jesus sees it. And he's bringing a reward with your name on it. But he warns about the opposite too. Luke chapter 12 continues. What if the servant says, my master's taking too long, and starts getting lazy, or even abusive? Jesus says the master will return at a time he doesn't expect and bring judgment. This parable is for the someday Christians, the ones who keep putting off surrender, the ones who think they'll get serious later. Later might not come. So the question is simple. Are you living ready? Let's pause here. These parables aren't soft. They're not about feelings. They're about fruit, they ask. Are you watching? Are you working? Are you wise? Or just wasting time? Jesus isn't just telling bedtime stories. He's handing out wake-up calls. All right, time to move into some of the most uncomfortable, confrontational, and important stories Jesus ever told. These next parables aren't just about money. They're about how you handle what you've been given. And spoiler, God's watching your heart, not your bank account. Let's go. Let's start with the rich fool. Luke chapter 12. Touched on this earlier. A man has a record-breaking harvest. He tears down his barns to build bigger ones. He says to himself, I've got it made. Time to relax. But that night, God shows up and says, you fool, tonight your life is over. Here's the punchline. Jesus says this is what happens to people who store up treasure for themselves, but aren't rich toward God. Wealth isn't evil. But if all your plans are for earth, you're planning for a future you won't live to see. The real question, are you investing in eternity? Next, there's the widow's offering, Mark chapter 12. Jesus is watching people give at the temple. The rich drop in large amounts, but then, poor widow comes and drops in 2 small coins, and Jesus lights up. says she gave more than anyone else here. Why? Because she gave out of sacrifice, not surplus. Heaven doesn't count like humans do. It doesn't measure what you gave, it measures what you kept. Generosity isn't about zeros, it's about trust. Now back to the parable of the talents. Matthew chapter 25. Remember, one servant got 5, one got 2, one got 1. The 2 who multiplied their gifts, rewarded. The one who buried it out of fear, rebuked. To those who use well what they're given, even more will be given. But to those who do nothing, even what they have will be taken away. In other words, faithfulness opens doors. Fear locks them. What are you doing with what God gave you? Not what He gave someone else. You, your voice, your story, your resources. They're not just blessings, they're assignments. Here's a surprising one. The shrewd manager. Luke chapter 16. Jesus tells a story about a guy who's about to be fired. So what does he do? Quickly reduces people's debts, cuts deals. So when he's out of a job, he's got friends who will welcome him. It sounds shady. Jesus commends him, not for dishonesty, but for being smart about the future. Then he says, use worldly wealth to gain eternal friends. Translation. Use your temporary resources for eternal impact. Your money can fund missionaries, feed families, build churches, support ministries, create kingdom ripple effects. Don't just build wealth, deploy it. Then he circles back to forgiveness with the unforgiving servant. Matthew chapter 18. Why is this in a section on stewardship? Because mercy is something you've been given, and Jesus expects you to steward it well. You were forgiven an unpayable debt. So when you choke someone over a minor offense, you've forgotten what you've received. Jesus doesn't play with hypocrisy. If you hold a grudge in one hand, while holding grace in the other, don't be surprised when judgment comes. Mercy is a gift, but it's not meant to stay in your pocket. Another sobering one. The rich man and Lazarus. Luke chapter 16. A rich man lives in luxury, right outside his gate. A poor man named Lazarus, covered in sores. The rich man never helps him, not once. They both die. Lazarus is comforted in heaven. The rich man, tormented, begs for relief, but it's too late. There's a chasm, and it can't be crossed. Jesus is telling us, your comfort now doesn't guarantee comfort later. Ignoring suffering has consequences. You are accountable for what you didn't do. Who's at your gate right now? What are you doing about it? Finally, the faithful steward. Luke chapter 12. Jesus says, to whom much is given, much will be required. This isn't just about money. It's about everything. Your time, your skills, your influence, your opportunities, your second chances, all of it. If God trusted you with it, He's expecting a return. So don't just be a Christian in name, be a steward in practice. Let's be honest. This section stings a little, but that's kind of the point. Jesus isn't trying to take your money. He's trying to free your heart, because money makes a great tool, but a terrible master. And at the end of your life, He's not going to ask how much you saved. He's going to ask what you did with what He gave. Let's bring it home. These last parables, they're the heavy ones. Not because Jesus was trying to scare people, but because He was trying to wake them up. These are the stories where eternity is on the line. Let's finish strong. We'll start with the wheat and the weeds. Matthew chapter 13. Jesus tells a story about a farmer who plants good seed. But at night, an enemy plants weeds, and they grow up together. The workers ask, should we pull the weeds now? The farmer says, no. Let them grow side by side. We'll separate them at harvest. Jesus explains it plainly. The wheat are the righteous. The weeds are the wicked. And the harvest is the end of the age. Translation. You're going to live next to people who don't bear fruit, even in the church. Don't panic. Don't play God. Just grow, because one day God will do the separating. He won't get it wrong. Next is the net. Matthew chapter 13, again. The kingdom is like a giant fishing net. It catches all kinds of fish. But when it's full, the fishermen sit down and sort the good from the bad. Same theme as the weeds and wheat. But this one feels even more direct. You might be in the net. You might look like a Christian, talk like a Christian, post like a Christian. But at the end, the only thing that matters is whether Jesus knows you. Don't just settle for proximity to the gospel. Be transformed by it. Then there's the sheep and the goats. Matthew chapter 25. At the end of time, Jesus gathers the nations. He separates people like a shepherd separates sheep from goats. The sheep, they fed the hungry, clothed the poor, visited the sick and the prisoner. The goats, they didn't. And both groups are shocked because judgment wasn't based on what they said they believed. It was based on what they actually did. Jesus ends it with this line: "Whatever you did or didn't do for the least of these, you did or didn't do for me." Let that hit you. He takes it personal. Another hard one. The rich man and Lazarus. We covered this earlier, but it belongs here too. A rich man lives in luxury. Lazarus suffers at his gate. They die, and the roles are reversed. The rich man now in torment begs for relief. The answer is no. There's a gap that can't be crossed. Pleads for someone to warn his brothers. But Jesus says, if they don't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead. Spoiler, someone did rise. And still, many aren't listening. This parable is a warning. If you don't listen now, you might not get another chance. Then comes the narrow door. Luke chapter 13. Someone asked Jesus, "Lord, will only a few be saved?" Jesus doesn't give a number. He gives a picture. He says, make every effort to enter through the narrow door, because many will try to enter and won't be able to. They'll knock, and he'll say, "I don't know you." They'll argue, "We ate with you, we heard you teach." But the door is shut. Familiarity with Jesus is not the same as surrender to him. You can be around his words and still miss his heart. Enter through the narrow door while it's still open. And then there's the barren fig tree. Luke chapter 13. A man has a fig tree in his vineyard. Year after year, it doesn't produce fruit. He says, cut it down. But the gardener speaks up, give it one more year. Let me dig around it, fertilize it. If it still doesn't bear fruit, then cut it down. This one is all about mercy. God isn't looking for perfection, but he is looking for fruit. And if you're not bearing any, don't assume judgment is far off. It might just be delayed. The clock is ticking, but grace is still digging. Finally, there's the wedding banquet. Matthew chapter 22. A king throws a wedding feast for his son. He invites the guests, but they refuse. So he opens the invitation wide. To anyone and everyone, the hall fills. But one guest isn't wearing wedding clothes, and he's thrown out. This isn't about fashion, it's about preparation. In Scripture, being clothed often represents salvation. You don't show up to the kingdom in your own righteousness. You come covered in grace. The point. God's invitation is open to all, but not all will be ready. And just like that, Jesus brings the parables to a close. He didn't tell these stories to entertain us. He told them to expose us, to comfort, convict, and call us home. Some people walked away amazed, others walked away angry. But nobody walked away unchanged. So here's the question. Which parable was for you? Because if even one of them pierced your heart, that wasn't an accident. That was the voice of the shepherd, calling you, challenging you, inviting you to repent, to obey, to come home. And friend, the door is still open, but it won't be forever. So whatever you do, don't scroll past this moment. If one of these parables hit you, don't just nod and move on. Pause. Ask God what he wants you to do about it. If you've been running, come home. If you've been asleep, wake up. If you've been storing treasures where they can't last, start storing them in eternity. And if you don't know where to start, open the Gospels. Read his words for yourself and let them rearrange your life. Because the same Jesus who told these stories is still telling them to you right now. And the question is, what will you do with what you've heard?